In the grand theatre of human relations, where passion meets politics and desire intersects with power, there exists a realm of knowledge that most men stumble through blindly, guided only by instinct, romantic notions, and the well-meaning but often misguided advice of those who came before them. This is the realm of understanding women, not as mysterious creatures to be worshipped or conquered, but as complex human beings operating within their own frameworks of motivation, desire, and strategic thinking. The wisdom I wish I had received in my youth was not the sanitized platitudes of just be yourself or treat her like a princess, nor was it the bitter cynicism of those who had loved and lost without understanding why. Instead, it was the clear-eyed, pragmatic understanding that Niccolo Machiavelli might have applied to the dynamics between men and women, a framework that acknowledges both the beauty and the brutal realities of human nature, unclouded by romantic idealism or misogynistic bitterness. The first principle of this understanding is that attraction is not a choice, but a response to demonstrated value and strategic positioning. Women, like all humans, are drawn to those who exhibit competence, confidence, and the ability to navigate the world effectively. This is not shallow materialism, but evolutionary wisdom encoded in the deepest parts of the human psyche. A woman's attraction to a man who displays mastery over his environment, who moves through challenges with grace and purpose, who commands respect from others. This is not weakness on her part, but intelligence. Yet this principle is consistently misunderstood by men who believe that attraction can be negotiated through logical argument, purchased through excessive generosity, or earned through self-deprecating niceness. They fail to understand that attraction operates on a level far more fundamental than conscious reasoning. It responds to signals of genetic fitness, social status, emotional stability, and future potential. Signals that must be demonstrated through action and presence, not proclaimed through words or promised through sacrifice. The young man I once was approached relationships with the naive belief that sincere intentions and genuine feelings were sufficient to earn reciprocal affection. I believed that if I could just communicate clearly enough, if I could just be understanding enough, if I could just sacrifice enough of my own needs and desires, that the object of my affection would surely recognize my worth and respond in kind. This belief was not only incorrect but actively counterproductive, as it positioned me as a supplicant rather than an equal, as someone seeking validation rather than offering value. The Machiavellian understanding recognizes that relationships, like all human interactions, contain elements of power, strategy, and mutual benefit. This does not make them cold or calculating, any more than understanding the physics of flight makes a bird soaring less beautiful. Rather, it provides a framework for operating effectively within these dynamics, creating genuine attraction and mutual respect rather than one-sided neediness masquerading as love. A man who understands these principles does not manipulate or deceive, but rather positions himself authentically as someone worthy of attraction and respect. He develops genuine competence in areas that matter. He builds a life of purpose and meaning that exists independently of any particular relationship. He cultivates emotional strength that allows him to remain centered and decisive even in the face of uncertainty or rejection. Most importantly, he destroys within himself the weak, needy, validation-seeking aspects of his personality that repel rather than attract. The weak self is that part of a man that seeks external validation for his worth, that needs others to complete him, that believes his value is determined by how others respond to him. This weak self manifests in countless ways: the excessive pursuit of approval, the inability to maintain boundaries, the tendency to sacrifice personal principles for the hope of acceptance, the deep fear of being alone or rejected. It is this weak self that makes a man vulnerable to manipulation, that causes him to make poor decisions in relationships, that ultimately repels the very women he most desires to attract. When a man destroys this weak self, not through cruelty or suppression, but through the development of genuine strength and self-sufficiency, he becomes fundamentally unshakable. He can engage with women from a position of abundance rather than scarcity, offering genuine value rather than seeking validation, approaching relationships as an enhancement to an already complete life rather than as a desperate attempt to fill an inner void. This process begins with the brutal honesty required to examine one's own motivations and behaviors without the comforting lies we tell ourselves about our noble intentions. How often do our gestures of generosity mask a covert contract, an unspoken expectation that kindness should be rewarded with affection? How frequently do our expressions of understanding and empathy serve as attempts to position ourselves as different from other men, hoping to be chosen for our sensitivity rather than our strength? The Machiavellian perspective demands that we see these patterns clearly, not to judge them harshly, but to understand them as natural but ineffective strategies that must be replaced with more sophisticated approaches. Just as Machiavelli advised princes to understand the true nature of power rather than how power ought to work in an ideal world, men must understand the true nature of attraction and relationship dynamics rather than how they believe these things ought to work based on romantic fantasies or moral prescriptions. This understanding reveals that women are not seeking men who will serve them, but men who will lead them. Not in the sense of domination or control, but in the sense of providing direction, strength, and security in an uncertain world. They are attracted to men who have conquered themselves, who have developed mastery over their own emotions and impulses, who can remain calm and decisive when others are reactive and chaotic. The irony is that the qualities that make a man truly attractive to women are the same qualities that make him successful in every other area of life. Competence, confidence, emotional stability, clear communication, strong boundaries, and unwavering principles are valuable whether one is leading a business, building friendships, or creating romantic connections. The man who develops these qualities for their own sake, as part of becoming the person he is capable of being, naturally becomes attractive to others without needing to pursue attraction directly. This leads to one of the most profound insights of Machiavellian wisdom. The best way to get what you want from others is often to stop wanting it so desperately. When a man is genuinely content with his life, when he has developed multiple sources of meaning and fulfillment, when he truly believes he will be fine regardless of whether any particular person chooses to be part of his life, he paradoxically becomes much more attractive to others. His lack of neediness creates space for others to feel their own desire rather than feeling pressured by his. Yet this principle is frequently misunderstood as advocating for emotional detachment or indifference. The Machiavellian approach is not about becoming cold or uncaring, but about developing what might be called attached non-attachment, the ability to care deeply while remaining grounded in one's own center, to be loving while maintaining independence, to be generous while preserving self-respect. This balance allows for genuine intimacy without the desperation that destroys it. The foundation of this balance is self-knowledge and self-mastery. A man must understand his own patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving well enough to recognize when he is operating from strength versus when he is operating from weakness. He must develop the discipline to act according to his principles rather than his impulses, especially when those impulses are driven by fear, anger, or neediness. This self-mastery is not achieved through suppression or denial, but through honest acknowledgement and conscious choice. When a man feels the urge to text a woman who has not responded to his previous messages, he acknowledges the impulse without immediately acting on it. He examines what this impulse reveals about his internal state, perhaps insecurity, perhaps a need for validation, perhaps simply impatience. He then chooses his response based on what action would be most aligned with his values and long-term interests, rather than what action would provide immediate emotional relief. This level of self-awareness and self-control is attractive because it signals reliability and emotional stability. Women, like all people, are drawn to those who are predictable in their core character, while remaining dynamic and interesting in their expressions. They want to know that a man will remain fundamentally the same person whether he is facing success or failure, approval or rejection, ease or difficulty. The weak self, by contrast, is reactive and unstable. It becomes elated by small signs of interest and devastated by minor rejections. It makes promises it cannot keep when trying to impress, then fails to follow through when the initial excitement fades. It says what it thinks others want to hear rather than what it actually believes. This inconsistency creates anxiety in others who never know which version of the person they are dealing with at any given moment. When a man destroys his weak self, he becomes someone others can rely on. His word becomes his bond because he has developed the self-knowledge to make only commitments he can keep and the strength to follow through even when it becomes difficult. His emotional responses become appropriate to the situation rather than exaggerated by personal insecurities. His presence becomes calming rather than energizing because others sense his inner stability. This transformation is not achieved overnight, nor is it a destination that, once reached, requires no further maintenance. It is an ongoing process of growth and development that requires constant vigilance and continuous effort. The weak self does not disappear entirely, but rather becomes integrated and managed, like a reformed alcoholic who must remain aware of his tendency toward excess while choosing sobriety daily. The process begins with observation. learning to notice one's own thoughts, emotions, and behavioral patterns without immediately acting on them. This creates space between stimulus and response, allowing for conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. Most men go through life on autopilot, responding to situations based on unconscious programming developed in childhood and reinforced through years of repeated behavior. Breaking these patterns requires first becoming aware that they exist. The next step is developing alternative responses that serve one's actual interests rather than providing temporary emotional relief. When faced with rejection, instead of arguing, pleading, or trying to change the other person's mind, a man learns to accept the reality of the situation with grace and dignity. When feeling insecure in a relationship, instead of seeking constant reassurance or becoming possessive, he focuses on developing his own life and interests more fully. These alternative responses often feel uncomfortable initially because they require acting contrary to deeply ingrained impulses. The weak self wants immediate validation and relief from discomfort. The strong self is willing to tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term benefit. Learning to choose strength over weakness is like learning any other skill. It requires practice, patience, and persistence. The payoff, however, extends far beyond improved relationships with women. A man who has destroyed his weak self finds that his friendships become deeper and more authentic, his career advances more rapidly, his creative endeavors become more fulfilling, and his overall satisfaction with life increases dramatically. He discovers that most of the problems he attributed to external circumstances were actually products of his own internal weaknesses and can be resolved through internal development. Part 2. The Art of Strategic Engagement. The second phase of Machiavellian wisdom in understanding women concerns the strategic elements of engagement, how a man positions himself, communicates, and navigates the complex dynamics of attraction and relationship development. This is not about manipulation or deception, but about understanding the underlying currents that drive human interaction and learning to work with them rather than against them. The fundamental error most men make is approaching women as if they were men, assuming that directness, logic, and explicit communication will produce the desired results. While these qualities have their place, they often miss the subtler dimensions of feminine psychology and the indirect ways in which attraction and connection are built. Women, generally speaking, are more attuned to emotional undercurrents, nonverbal communication, and the implicit meanings behind explicit words. They respond to what a man demonstrates about himself through his actions and presence more than what he claims about himself through his words. This principle manifests in countless ways throughout the process of meeting and developing relationships with women. When a man approaches a woman with obvious nervousness, no amount of smooth talking can overcome the fundamental signal his physiology is sending about his confidence and social status. When he pursues too eagerly, expressing high levels of interest before establishing any genuine connection, he signals that his options are limited and his standards are low. When he agrees with everything she says and never challenges her thinking, he positions himself as a follower rather than a leader, regardless of his intentions. The strategic approach requires understanding that attraction is built through a combination of demonstrated value, emotional stimulation, and strategic scarcity. Demonstrated value is not about showing off or bragging, but about allowing one's competence and accomplishments to emerge naturally through conversation and interaction. A man who has genuinely developed himself will have interesting stories to tell, unique perspectives to share, and evident expertise in areas that matter to him. These qualities become apparent through authentic conversation rather than through self-promotion. Emotional stimulation comes from a man's ability to create genuine excitement and interest in his interactions. Women are drawn to men who make them feel more alive, who expand their emotional range, who introduce them to new ideas and experiences. The man who can make a woman laugh, think, feel challenged, or experience genuine surprise is providing something valuable that many others cannot. Strategic scarcity refers to the understanding that what is easily obtained is often less valued than what requires effort to achieve. This does not mean playing games or being deliberately difficult, but rather maintaining one's own life, interests, and priorities rather than dropping everything for a new romantic interest. A man who is genuinely busy with meaningful pursuits, who has other people and activities that matter to him, who cannot always be available at a moment's notice, naturally creates the kind of scarcity that increases rather than decreases attraction. These principles work because they align with fundamental aspects of human psychology rather than fighting against them. People value what they have to work for more than what is given freely. They are attracted to those who seem to have something valuable that others want. They respect those who maintain their own standards and boundaries rather than bending to accommodate others' preferences. The application of these principles requires a man to develop what might be called strategic patience, the ability to allow relationships to develop at a natural pace rather than trying to force or accelerate the process. This patience comes from abundance rather than scarcity thinking. A man who knows he has value to offer, who trusts in his ability to attract multiple potential partners, who is genuinely content with his life as it is, can afford to let things unfold naturally rather than grasping desperately at each opportunity. This strategic patience manifests in numerous specific behaviors that distinguish attractive men from needy ones. An attractive man responds to messages in a reasonable time frame but not immediately, showing that he has other things going on in his life. He makes plans in advance rather than trying to see someone at the last minute, demonstrating that his time has value and structure. He maintains his own interests and friendships even when developing a new romantic connection, showing that he is a complete person rather than someone looking for another person to complete him. Most importantly, he is willing to walk away from situations that do not serve his interests or align with his values, regardless of how attractive the other person might be. This willingness to walk away is perhaps the most powerful position a man can occupy in any relationship, not because it threatens the other person, but because it demonstrates his genuine options and standards. The weak self cannot walk away because it has invested its entire sense of worth in the outcome of each particular interaction. It needs the validation of being chosen, the relief of having someone wanted, the temporary escape from loneliness that romantic attention provides. This neediness is palpable and repulsive to others, not because there is anything inherently wrong with having needs, but because neediness creates pressure and obligation rather than joy and freedom. When a man has destroyed his weak self, he engages with women from a position of genuine interest rather than desperate need. He wants to get to know them not because he needs their validation, but because he finds them genuinely interesting and potentially valuable additions to his life. This shift in motivation changes everything about the interaction. Instead of trying to impress or please, he focuses on discovering whether there is genuine compatibility and mutual attraction. This approach allows for much more authentic communication because there is no hidden agenda driving the conversation. When a man is not trying to get something from a woman, he can simply be himself and let her decide whether she likes what she sees. This authenticity is refreshing in a world where most people are performing rather than being genuine, and it creates the foundation for real connection rather than surface-level attraction based on false pretenses. The strategic element comes not from manipulation but from understanding and working with natural dynamics rather than against them. Just as a sailor uses the wind and currents rather than fighting them, a man who understands feminine psychology works with women's natural inclinations rather than trying to force them to respond in ways that feel unnatural. For example, most women enjoy some degree of challenge and mystery in their romantic lives. They are drawn to men who are not entirely predictable, who maintain some level of independence and autonomy, who do not immediately become completely available and accommodating. This is not because women are inherently difficult or because they enjoy playing games, but because challenge and mystery create the conditions for sustained interest and excitement. The man who immediately reveals everything about himself, who becomes completely available, who has no boundaries or preferences of his own, eliminates the very elements that create and maintain attraction. He may believe he is being loving and generous, but he is actually removing the psychological space that allows desire to flourish. This understanding leads to one of the most important but counterintuitive insights of strategic engagement. The best way to show someone you care about them is often to maintain your own life and interests rather than revolving your world around them. When a man continues to pursue his own goals, maintain his friendships, engage in his hobbies, and develop himself even after meeting someone he is interested in, he demonstrates that he is a complete and interesting person who would enhance her life rather than burden it. This balance between interest and independence requires constant recalibration. Too much independence can signal lack of genuine interest or availability. Too little independence can signal neediness and desperation. The key is maintaining authentic engagement while preserving one's own center, being genuinely interested in getting to know someone, while remaining rooted in one's own life and values. The communication aspects of strategic engagement involve understanding that women often communicate on multiple levels simultaneously. The literal content of what is said may be less important than the emotional subtext, the relational implications, or the test being presented. When a woman expresses doubt about a man's interest, she may not be seeking logical reassurance, but rather testing his confidence and emotional stability. When she describes problems in her life, she may not be seeking solutions, but rather emotional connection and understanding. Men who respond only to the literal level of communication often miss these deeper currents and respond in ways that feel off-target to the woman involved. Learning to listen for and respond to emotional undertones, relational dynamics, and unstated needs requires developing emotional intelligence and intuition that many men have neglected in favor of more analytical approaches. This does not mean abandoning logic and directness entirely, but rather developing the flexibility to communicate in ways that actually connect with the person you are talking to, rather than in ways that feel most natural to you. Sometimes this means offering emotional support rather than practical solutions. Sometimes it means asking questions rather than making statements. Sometimes it means sharing your own feelings rather than analyzing hers. The strategic element comes from understanding these different levels of communication and choosing your responses consciously rather than automatically. When you recognize that someone is testing your confidence, you can choose to respond with calm assurance rather than defensive explanation. When you sense that someone needs emotional validation, you can choose to provide it rather than trying to fix their problems. When you detect that someone is pulling away, you can choose to give them space rather than pursuing more intensely. These choices require the emotional strength and self-awareness, but come from destroying one's weak self. The weak self takes everything personally and reacts defensively to any sign of conflict or rejection. The strong self understands that other people's behaviors are usually about their own internal states rather than about you, and can respond appropriately rather than reactively. This emotional mastery is one of the most attractive qualities a man can develop, because it creates safety and stability for others. Women, like all people, are drawn to those who remain calm and centered in the face of emotional turbulence. When they want partners who can handle their own emotions as well as provide support during difficult times, rather than partners who add to the chaos or become overwhelmed by normal relationship challenges. The development of this emotional mastery requires extensive self-work and often involves confronting aspects of oneself that are uncomfortable to acknowledge. Most men carry unresolved issues from their relationships with their mothers, their experiences with previous romantic partners, their struggles with self-worth, and their fears about intimacy and vulnerability. These unresolved issues create reactive patterns that sabotage relationships and prevent authentic connection. Working through these issues, whether through therapy, self-reflection, meditation, or other growth practices, is not optional for a man who wants to be truly attractive and successful in relationships. The unhealed wounds and unconscious patterns will continue to create problems regardless of how well one understands strategic principles or communication techniques. The integration of strategic understanding with emotional health creates what might be called authentic masculinity, the ability to be strong yet vulnerable, confident yet humble, independent yet connected. This integration allows a man to engage with women in ways that are both effective and genuine, both strategic and heartfelt. Part 3. The transformation and its rewards. The final phase of this Machiavellian understanding involves the complete transformation that occurs when a man fully integrates these principles and destroys his weak self entirely. This transformation extends far beyond improved success with women to encompass every aspect of life, creating a fundamental shift in how one moves through the world and relates to others. The man who has completed this inner work becomes genuinely attractive, not through any external technique or strategy, but through the natural magnetism that comes from being fully realized as a human being. He has developed genuine confidence that does not require external validation, authentic strength that does not need to prove itself, and deep self-knowledge that allows him to navigate complex situations with wisdom and grace. This transformation begins with the recognition that most of what we have been taught about masculinity and relationships is either incomplete or entirely wrong. The cultural messaging that tells men to be nice guys who put women on pedestals and sacrifice their own needs creates weak, unattractive men who ultimately repel the women they most want to attract. The opposing cultural messaging that portrays women as adversaries to be conquered or manipulated creates toxic dynamics that prevent genuine connection and mutual respect. The Machiavellian approach transcends both of these extremes by focusing on effectiveness and results rather than ideology. It asks not what should work in an ideal world, but what actually works in the real world with real people who have real psychology and evolutionary programming. This pragmatic focus leads to insights that are often uncomfortable but ultimately liberating. One of the most profound of these insights is that women are not attracted to men who need them. but to men who want them while being perfectly capable of living fulfilled lives without them. This distinction between need and want is crucial and often misunderstood. Need creates pressure, obligation, and resentment. Want creates desire, appreciation, and joy. A man who genuinely does not need a woman to complete him can offer his presence as a gift rather than seeking her presence as a necessity. This shift from need to want requires developing what might be called emotional self-sufficiency. The ability to meet one's own emotional needs for validation, security, and meaning without requiring others to provide these things. This does not mean becoming cold or isolated, but rather developing the inner resources that allow for healthy interdependence rather than unhealthy codependence. The process of developing emotional self-sufficiency often involves confronting and healing the wounds that created the weak self in the first place. For many men, these wounds stem from early experiences with their mothers, who may have been overly protective, emotionally unavailable, manipulative, or inconsistent in their love and approval. These early experiences create templates for relationships that may have been adaptive in childhood but become destructive in adult romantic relationships. A man whose mother was overly protective may struggle with taking risks and asserting independence in his adult relationships. A man whose mother was emotionally unavailable may become either overly pursuing or overly distant with romantic partners. A man whose mother used guilt and manipulation to control his behavior may find himself either replicating these patterns or becoming overly susceptible to them in others. Healing these wounds requires not just intellectual understanding, but emotional processing and behavioral change. This might involve therapy, men's groups, meditation practices, or other forms of inner work that allow old patterns to be released and new ones to be developed. The goal is not to blame mothers or become bitter about past experiences, but to understand how these experiences shaped current patterns and take responsibility for changing what no longer serves. The reward for this inner work is the development of what psychologists call secure attachment, the ability to form close relationships while maintaining individual identity, to be loving without being possessive, to be vulnerable without being weak. Securely attached individuals are naturally attractive because they offer the promise of intimacy without the threat of engulfment. This secure attachment style manifests in relationships as a relaxed confidence that does not need constant reassurance, an ability to communicate directly about needs and boundaries without being aggressive or passive-aggressive, and a capacity for both independence and intimacy depending on what the situation calls for. These qualities are rare and highly valued by emotionally healthy women who are also seeking secure, stable partnerships. The development of secure attachment and emotional self-sufficiency naturally leads to what might be called abundance thinking, rather than scarcity thinking. A man operating from abundance believes that there are many potential partners available to him, that he has valuable qualities to offer, and that rejection or loss, while disappointing, is not catastrophic. This mindset allows him to take appropriate risks, maintain his standards, and walk away from situations that do not serve his interests. Scarcity thinking, by contrast, operates from the belief that opportunities are limited, that one must accept whatever is available, and that rejection or loss is devastating. This mindset leads to settling for less than one deserves, compromising one's values to maintain relationships, and staying in situations that are harmful or unfulfilling out of fear that nothing better will come along. The shift from scarcity to abundance thinking often requires expanding one's social circle, developing new interests and competencies, and actively creating more opportunities for meeting potential partners. A man who only knows a few women and rarely meets new ones will naturally operate from scarcity. A man who is actively involved in multiple communities, pursues varied interests, and regularly encounters new people will naturally develop abundance thinking. This abundance mindset is attractive because it removes the pressure and desperation that repel others. When a man truly believes he has options, he can afford to be selective, patient, and authentic, rather than desperate, reactive, and accommodating. This selectivity and standards actually increase his attractiveness because they signal his value and self-respect. The ultimate expression of this transformation is the development of what might be called outcome independence, the ability to engage fully in relationships while remaining unattached to specific results. A man who has achieved outcome independence can pursue women he is interested in without being devastated by rejection, can express his authentic feelings without being manipulative about responses, and can invest emotionally in relationships without losing himself in them. This outcome independence is perhaps the most attractive quality a man can develop, because it allows for genuine intimacy without the neediness that destroys it. When a woman senses that a man will be fine regardless of whether she chooses to be with him, she feels free to explore her own feelings without pressure or obligation. This freedom paradoxically makes her more likely to choose him, as she experiences her attraction as arising from her own desire rather than from his need. The practical applications of this transformation are endless. In dating situations, a man with outcome independence can approach women naturally and authentically without the anxiety that comes from needing specific responses. He can express interest without being pushy, show affection without being clingy, and maintain boundaries without being cruel. His relaxed confidence and genuine interest make him naturally attractive and easy to be around. In established relationships, outcome independence allows for honest communication about problems without the fear that any conflict might end the relationship. It enables maintaining individual interests and friendships without jealousy or possessiveness. It creates space for both partners to grow and change without threatening the stability of the connection. Perhaps most importantly, outcome independence allows a man to choose partners based on genuine compatibility and mutual attraction rather than on convenience, fear of being alone, or unconscious psychological patterns. When a man does not need a relationship to feel complete, he can afford to wait for the right person and invest his time and energy only in connections that truly enhance his life. The irony of this entire process is that the man who becomes truly attractive to women is the man who no longer needs their attraction to feel good about himself. He has developed sources of meaning, purpose, and satisfaction that exist independently of romantic relationships. He pursues women not to fill a void in his life, but to share an already fulfilling existence with someone who appreciates and enhances it. This shift represents the complete destruction of the weak self that seeks external validation and the full emergence of the strong self that creates value for others. The transformed man becomes someone others naturally want to be around, not because he is trying to please them, but because his presence is genuinely enriching. He offers wisdom instead of neediness, strength instead of weakness, leadership instead of followership. The rewards of this transformation extend far beyond romantic success. Men who have completed this process typically experience dramatic improvements in their careers, as the same confidence and emotional intelligence that attract women also lead to professional advancement. Their friendships become deeper and more satisfying as they are able to be authentic and vulnerable without being needy or manipulative. Their creative and entrepreneurial endeavors flourish as they are no longer paralyzed by fear of failure or rejection. Most importantly, they develop a deep sense of self-respect and inner peace that comes from knowing they have faced their demons and emerged victorious. They no longer need to pretend to be something they are not or hide aspects of themselves they are ashamed of. They have integrated their shadow sides and developed genuine self-acceptance that allows for continued growth without self-hatred. This inner peace is perhaps the most attractive quality of all, as it signals to others that here is someone who has done the hard work of personal development and achieved a level of emotional maturity that is rare in our culture. Women, especially those who have also done their own inner work, are naturally drawn to men who embody this kind of integration and wholeness. The ultimate wisdom of the Machiavellian approach to understanding women is that it leads not to manipulation or conquest, but to genuine mutual respect and authentic connection. By developing himself into someone genuinely worthy of attraction and love, a man creates the conditions for relationships based on choice rather than need, on mutual enhancement rather than mutual dependency, on genuine compatibility rather than unconscious patterns. The man who destroys his weak self cannot be destroyed by others because he is no longer dependent on their approval, validation, or presence for his sense of worth and well-being. He engages with women from a position of strength and abundance, offering genuine value while maintaining his own center. This creates the kind of magnetic attraction and deep connection that both men and women ultimately seek but so rarely find. The path to this transformation is neither easy nor quick, but it is perhaps the most rewarding journey a man can undertake. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about oneself, releasing old patterns that no longer serve, and developing new capacities for emotional intelligence and self-mastery. The reward is not just success with women, but the development of authentic masculinity that serves both oneself and others in all areas of life. This is the advice about women I wish I had received. That attracting and keeping quality women is not about techniques or strategies, but about becoming the kind of man who naturally attracts them through his developed character, emotional maturity, and genuine strength. It is about destroying everything within oneself that is weak, needy, and dependent, and building everything that is strong, valuable, and self-sufficient. The man who achieves this transformation discovers that he has gained not just the ability to attract women, but the power to create the kind of life he truly desires in every area. He becomes the author of his own story rather than a character in someone else's, the creator of his own destiny rather than a victim of circumstances. This is the ultimate promise of Machiavellian wisdom, not just effectiveness in achieving one's goals, but the development of the strength and wisdom to choose goals worthy of one's potential. In the end, the greatest victory is not conquering others, but conquering oneself. The man who achieves this victory becomes unconquerable by any external force, for he has destroyed within himself everything that could be used as a weapon against him. This is the foundation of all true power and the secret of all genuine attraction.